a parked self-driving car, and there are drones hanging from the rafters. It looks like a museum of alternative futures.
Employs around 180,000 people worldwide, making it one of the biggest employers in the tech industry.
I'm sure you're all familiar with Google's Moonshot factory. It's the home of Google's most ambitious projects, from Google Glass and Waymo to Loon and Verily. Even before the Moonshot factory was formally founded in 2010, Google was at the forefront of technological development and advancement. But it appears that this has been changing over the past couple of years. Like any corporation, Google has become more focused on profits and pleasing shareholders than making massive bets. We no longer see those over-the-top presentations from Sergey Brin and Larry Page. Nor do we hear about Google making much tangible progress with self-driving. This trend has simply been exacerbated by the recession. In September, Google canceled up to half of their R&D projects across the company. And more recently, it was reported that Google is diverting much of its Moonshot factory efforts into revenue-generating projects. This trend doesn't just apply to Google's Moonshot factory either. It's actually a larger trend that can be observed across the company. Many Google veterans have raised concerns that Google's culture has become unrecognizable. And the recent layoffs are just one example of that. The old Google would have done anything to prevent layoffs similar to Southwest. If you didn't know, Southwest has never done layoffs, despite facing way more tumultuous times than Google, from the 1973 oil crisis in 2001 to 2008 and the pandemic. Meanwhile, Google is posting near-record profits and chose to lay off 12,000 people, mostly due to shareholder concerns. But likely the best example of Google turning the corner is the fact that they dropped their famous slogan, "Don't be evil." In 2015, Google added a new motto to their code of conduct, "Do the right thing," before dropping the original slogan in 2018. This massive shift didn't just happen overnight though. So here's the slow devolution of Google from being the ambitious startup that was at the forefront of tech to being the background company that just wants to stay in their lane. When you think about a career at Google, one of the first things that come to mind are the high compensation, prestige, and influence. For decades, Google has prided themselves with paying the absolute highest salaries, and from a statistical standpoint, this is still very much true. In 2021, Alphabet once again topped the median employee salary list, coming in with a median compensation of $295,000. Combine this with the insane perks that Google offers, like their free food and remote working opportunities, and you would think that Google employees are living the high life. Objectively speaking, they are. But happiness is very much a relative thing, and for people working at Google, all of these perks are very much the norm. Not to mention, Google is no longer the only company where you can enjoy these benefits. Until recently, the number of options that these people had was unprecedented, leading them to feel unsatisfied and, yes, undercompensated. I know that's probably hard to believe, so I've got survey results to back this up. Back in early 2022, Business Insider found that only a mere 46% of surveyed Google employees were happy with their compensation. In other words, over half of Google's workforce thinks that their compensation isn't competitive. And this feeling is simply getting stronger every single year. Back in 2020, 64% of Google's employees felt that their compensation was competitive. This number dropped to 56% in 2021 before dropping to 46%. Much of this can be explained by even stronger offers coming from startups like Coinbase and Stripe. But it's not just the compensation that Googlers are upset with. Many also feel that the company is becoming more bureaucratic and less transparent. Within the cloud division, for example, only 54% of employees feel that the promotional process is fair. You can decipher this in two ways. Either you can think that these guys are simply spoiled brats who don't realize how good they have it. Or you can think that these guys truly do have a lot more potential, like becoming a founder or an executive. Either way though, the end feeling is the same: unhappy and unmotivated employees. And this feeling only leads to two things: high attrition and/or a stagnant workforce. The high attrition is no secret. At Alphabet, the median tenure is only a mere 1.3 years. This statistic is skewed by new hires, but that doesn't really make the statistic all that much better. Speaking of new hires, Google has been aggressively recruiting and growing their workforce over the past 10 years. Between 2009 and 2021, Google's workforce grew from 20,000 employees to 156,000 employees. And realistically speaking, it's nearly impossible to maintain the same culture and caliber across 156,000 people. It's more than likely that a substantial portion of these new hires were simply looking for the compensation and resume boost. And when you have too many of these people, it's just a matter of time until your company becomes soulless. It's common for founders to have a bunch of beef with shareholders. Mark Zuckerberg, for example, is actively fighting the entire world when it comes to pursuing the metaverse. This was very much the same case with Google's founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin. And this strife between investors and executives is very much what gave Google its unique culture. In 2001, for example, Larry Page went ahead and fired all of Google's project managers. The reasoning? Well, Page felt that engineers didn't need anyone to give them directions and that they shouldn't be forced to follow arbitrary deadlines. HR did end up reversing this decision, but this gives us a glimpse of just how Page felt about managers and why Google ended up being such an engineering-driven company. Similarly, Sergey felt that no one should be 200 feet away from food. And this is why Google has so much food everywhere despite it being rather uneconomical. Many of Google's most iconic moves were actually such unorthodox rebellious actions. Both Page and Brin have a history of completing acquisitions without consulting anyone else in the company, including even the official CEO. This was the case with even Android and Google Earth. We should also note that this approach has led to a bunch of failures, like Google Glass. But the takeaway isn't that the founders were rebellious. The takeaway is that the founders didn't care about bureaucracy or angry shareholders. Their main goal was simply doing the best thing for the company. This is the main reason that both founders actually left Google. They felt that they could no longer do what was right for the company, and that there was simply too much red tape to keep fighting. Conversely, Google's new leadership isn't put off by the red tape. In fact, you could even argue that they like the red tape as it gives them purpose, definition, meaning. Their jobs as executives is to make shareholders happy and to constantly grow earnings quarter after quarter. And from this perspective, Sundar Pichai has hit it out of the park. Since he became CEO in 2015, Google stock has grown as much as 5x, and even with the recession, Google is up 4x. A similar story can be seen with Google's fundamentals as well. Since 2015, Google's revenue has grown from $70 billion to $280 billion, and their net income has grown from $15 billion to over $70 billion. So clearly, Sundar has given shareholders exactly what they wanted, but this very much came with a cost. To accomplish such growth, Google couldn't focus on random out-there projects that were very much a gamble. Instead, Google had to double down on their revenue-generating sectors such as ads and the cloud, and focus on making these endeavors as profitable as possible. And that's exactly what they did. They cut out all the fluff. But while this seemed like fluff for shareholders, this is what made Google, Google. And without it, Google became just another soulless tech corporation. While much of the new Google has to do with the shift in leadership and employee culture, not all of it can be attributed to Google themselves. Much of the old Google was formed by public sentiment, and much of the new Google is also formed by public sentiment. In fact, you could argue that Google's public sentiment was what made them so successful in the first place. Take Gmail, for example. Much of Gmail's appeal came from the fact that it was exclusive, had generous storage, and was anti-Yahoo and Microsoft. The same thing could be said about Chrome. Much of Chrome's appeal came from the fact that it was fast, reliable, and anti-Internet Explorer and Microsoft. Google had built this image as the white knight savior tech company that wasn't evil. But the sentiment around Google has shifted substantially over the past 15 years. Google is no longer the startup taking on big players. Google is the big player. Not to mention, Google has also built up a rather negative reputation when it comes to data collection and privacy. We've all seen those memes that Alexa, Google, and Siri are always listening. This sentiment hurts the company in two ways. For one, the public is less likely to support new products that come from the company. A great example of this is with Google Fi, their cell phone plan. Objectively speaking, Google Fi offers extremely generous plans that come in way cheaper than the competition. This is the same formula that Google used with Gmail and Google Fiber to great success. But most people don't even know about Google Fi because the cellular space already had an anti-carrier player, T-Mobile. If anything, Google was viewed more like AT&T and Verizon than they were as T-Mobile. And this makes sense because Google was essentially trying to control your smartphone, your OS, the things that you do on your phone, and your connection. If the public isn't even willing to support a cell phone plan, it's much less likely that they'll support something that's truly out there. I mean, just take a look at Facebook. Sure, the metaverse is underwhelming, but I'd bet that much of its criticism comes from people's already negative opinion of Facebook. The metaverse wouldn't be nearly as ridiculed if it wasn't associated with Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. For obvious reasons, Google does not want to go down the same path, so they've decided to simply play it on the safe side. Aside from the public not being receptive to new products, negative stigma also makes it much more difficult to attract the best talent. Google is not the top company that engineering students want to work for. The top companies that engineering students want to work for are SpaceX and Tesla. And those companies don't even pay crazy salaries or offer ridiculous perks. As more and more talented engineers flock to such companies and startups, it's no wonder why Google is no longer pushing the boundaries. In the end, Google was iconic for setting outrageous goals and going all in, regardless of how ridiculous it makes them look or the odds of success. But ever since Larry and Sergey left, Google has become much more tame, mostly due to complacent employees, a priority to please shareholders, and a rapidly deteriorating public image. Given that Google's revenue and net income was growing faster than they can count for the past several years, Google didn't have any problems keeping some of their projects alive. But now that Google can feel the pressure on their bottom line, Google is shifting to take decisive action. This isn't to say that Google will be screwed or that this move will backfire. In fact, I'm sure that this move will work out great financially. But at the same time, this is just another example of Google taking yet another step closer to becoming a Cisco or an Intel, and that's truly quite a shame. Are you a fan of the new Google? Comment that down below. Also, drop a like if you missed the old Google. And of course, consider checking out our Discord community to suggest future video ideas and consider subscribing to see more questions logically answered. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.